Good morning, everyone. It's Suzanne Taylor-King here for another episode of Unlock Your Way with STK. And I am so excited for this conversation today. Full transparency, Chris Kenny and I have known each other a long time. And so this is going to be a little bit different than one of those get to know you conversations. Chris is a coach and he has created something so incredible with what he's working on with the 3 life questions. I'm encouraging him to write a book on what he's doing and his work with me with the YOS and so many other incredible conversations we've had. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Really appreciate this.
Oh, I mean, to bring you to my tribe, not only my inner circle, you're in my referral pods, you're in my membership community, and such a valued member of my network. So thank you for that. But today, I want to hear a little bit more about who Chris is as a person and how you transitioned from being an attorney to being a coach.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to share. I tend to be an open book, as you know. So
Yes.
yeah, I'm totally on board.
Awesome. Because much like me, I had a full career for 20 some years as a dental hygienist, starting businesses and transitioned into coaching. What led you down that path?
So yes, I am a recovering lawyer. I don't know what step I'm in, but I'm on a journey. I do keep my license here. Just kind of work too hard to just let it go. So I do still do that. But to answer your question, what I learned shortly after practicing law. So I practiced law in a couple of really large law firms, and I realized fairly early on that it wasn't my calling. Now,
Mm.
I had spent a lot of money and time acquiring the law degree, and the law firm I worked for were exceptional. They were really great places to work, but I just realized it wasn't who I was. And in fact, when I had gone to law school, and then certainly my experience when I started practicing at some of these big firms, was I was really more drawn to, I'd rather be the business person on the business side of the deal. So I was on the transactional side of the law. I was not a litigator, so I was doing business deals. And
Okay.
so my experience was, wow, I'd really rather be that person who's the business person about to take their company public or whatever it might be.
Mm.
And so after doing that for a couple of years, I realized it wasn't what I wanted to do. And I had an opportunity to moved to New Mexico, which is where I live now. My wife is from here, and she and I were set to be married, and there was an opportunity for me to take over a family business.
Mm.
Sounds great. Uh, and at the same time, the funny thing is, it was my wife's family business. So my mother-in-law was the owner of this enterprise. And but it was a great opportunity. And so Debbie and I helped run this. It was a large travel agency. We were affiliated with American Express and had 26 employees.
Wow.
So I sort of jumped in with both feet to doing that and really enjoyed that. And then had another opportunity present itself to me to start a company with a couple of partners, business partners here in Albuquerque, and did that. It was an HR outsourcing company. So we would provide HR services to businesses that were large enough that they needed, someone to help them with all of those issues, but they were not big enough to actually have someone on staff. So That was a startup enterprise, and had everything gone according to our business plan, I would be talking to you from my own private island in the Caribbean, but
Ah,
it did not quite work out that way. And so I ended up joining with a colleague of mine to do business coaching and consulting and strategic planning work. So I did that for a number of years. Finally, he retired, and I had a choice to make. And my choice was to either continue doing the business coaching and consulting and strategic planning work, which I really enjoyed, or I could try to bring to the universe these three burning questions that had been on my mind for a long time. I've been sort of thinking about these for a while. And I finally decided, okay, it was time. If I was ever going to bring these three questions to the world, now time to do it. So that's sort of a brief history of time as to how I arrived here.
well, do you think that, the 3 life questions really came from your own personal development, your own quest for knowing yourself at a deeper level?
Mhm.
And, you know,
Absolutely.
yeah, I just see all of those transitions that you talked about. It
Yes.
sounds so easy when you describe those transitions, but
Yeah.
you and I both know that those transitions can feel very overwhelming and very difficult without some self-care, self-work, self-awareness.
Yeah, that's a great observation. It's absolutely the case. I mean, as I
Mm.
sit there and described my journey to you, it all sounds very linear
Yeah.
and very intentional, and I knew what I was doing. And the answer is none of those things is true.
Yeah.
Um, and at the same time, um, there was always this, I was always questioning, I think, my own, where I was, what I was doing, why I was doing it, who I was doing it for.
Mhm.
Um, I didn't have answers, but things just didn't feel right on the
Yeah.
inside. And fast forward to today, uh, I think the person that I'm interested in helping is a person who feels that very same way. They might be very successful. Look, I mean, I'm not, this isn't about touting myself, but I mean, I had, at these two really large international law firms, the partners in the firm uh, sort of were begging me not to leave. They were like, you have what it takes, you're going to be a great business partner, you're going to be a great partner here, etc.
Mhm.
And so walking away from those things was not easy.
Yeah.
But my gut or my heart was telling me, this wasn't where I was supposed to be. So I had a lot of quote unquote success going on. And even fast forward to when I was operating the business here in Albuquerque, right? We were doing very well. We had navigated through a real tumultuous time in the travel business. My timing was awful. I had, taken over this company right when the internet was on the ascendancy, and the airlines cut travel agency commissions, and
Mm.
over 90% of our operating revenue that my mother-in-law had built up was based on airline tickets. So we really had kind of a crisis we had to overcome. All of those things were great, and we navigated that. So there was a lot going on. I was married. I had two kids. They were both, and they're both still terrific people, two boys. So on the outside, everything looked great, but on the inside, I was still sort of struggling. And so, yes, long answer to your question, the distillation that
Mhm.
came, what I call the three life questions, very much is about my own wrestling with, where I was in the world and what I was supposed to be doing, etc. So, absolutely, that is absolutely the case.
Well, and you know what? I wanna acknowledge the bravery required, to do all of that. But there's something deeper here, this lack of satisfaction and personal fulfillment. Monetary success is so wonderful. I'm not going to say that it's not. There's
Totally agree.
there's certain
Absolutely.
things that financial success can do for you.
Yep.
But one of the things it can't do is have you be fulfilled and personally
Mhm.
satisfied with what you're doing
Right.
just for monetary reasons.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And so in my own journey and in my own wrestling with, those very things,
Mhm.
um, I I kept thinking about this book that
Mhm.
I had read in high school. I was required to read it.
Oh,
Um, and many of your listeners and viewers of the podcast are probably going to be familiar with this book, a very famous book by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And the title of the book is On Death and Dying. So, with that
mhm.
kind of title, I just want to assure your listeners that it was not something that I saw in a bookstore and decided to pick up and read over a weekend. I was required to read this book. And the book is about um, a study that she and her colleagues conducted around the world, and they wanted to know, how do people from various cultures handle the news that uh,
Hmm.
they have a terminal illness. They only have so much more time to live. And the most famous outcome of this book and the study is what you and I now know to be what's called the 5 stages of grief. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance are the 5 stages of grief that sort of came out of this study. Well, after reading this book, and as I was on my own journey of sort of discovery and figuring stuff out, the themes of the book kept coming back to me. And it was over the course of many years, as I sort of was thinking about this, that I realized that what the individual, in addition to the 5 stages of grief, what was really impactful about this book for me is that these individuals were really teaching us a lot about life.
Mm.
Because as I considered it, it didn't matter what the in the subjects in the book. It didn't matter what their gender was, or their cultural upbringing, or their socioeconomic status. None of those things seem to matter. What the individuals in the book, from my perspective, were wrestling with were three fundamental questions as they looked back on their lives and they were trying to put their lives into some sort of context.
Mhm.
The first was, did I live authentically? Did I live my life from the way I was meant to live it, not somebody else's version of who I was supposed to be? So that was one, all about authenticity. The second is, did I cultivate meaningful relationships in my life? And that one's really all about, did I give and experience, did I give and receive unconditional love from at least one person in my life? And then the final thing that I think the individuals in the study were wrestling with is, did I leave the world a little bit better? Did I have a
Mm.
positive impact? And so when you think about authenticity, impact, and relationships, the pithy acronym is AIR. A, authenticity; I, impact; R, relationships. Just how I invite people to sort of remember this stuff. And and so my three life questions are really about putting those things into the present tense, because from my perspective, it really doesn't do any of us much good to wait until the end to answer those.
Yeah.
It's really about, how do I live that way today? How can I be more authentic today? How can I be even more impactful today? How can I cultivate even more or better meaningful relationships in my life today? So that's really the gist of the where the three life questions came from.
Well, I think one thing stands out. I a long time ago, I did what's called a eulogy exercise,
Mm,
and it was with a coach I was working with, and, in writing your own eulogy, what you want, what your desire is for people to say about you after you're gone, and
mm,
who do you want to be saying those things? And I remember reflecting on that exercise, and it really shows you not only what's important to you, but also why not just be that person now? And instead of, you know, waiting for people to say those things about you, just live as that person
yeah,
now. And
yeah,
that was right about the time I was studying, positive psychology and Stoic philosophy, and all of those things were kind of coming together. And I think what you're saying is that by living that way now and thinking
mm,
about that on a regular basis, like, how am I living? You're asking us to consider authenticity, living a life true to yourself, having impact in the world, and then having connected relationships.
yeah,
Uh, I
yeah.
I don't
Because
think there's any other questions to ask.
well, it. So back to the book for a minute. That was the way I distilled what they were wrestling with, and the individuals from the way I read the stories, the case studies in the book, is that the individuals who were able to answer yes to those three questions um, were far more able to move through the five stages, and get to this notion of, acceptance, or not that anybody was looking forward to dying,
Hmm.
but that they were able to get to a sense of peace about how they had lived their lives. And therefore, it was easier, not easy, it was easier for them to accept, that the end of their life was coming on the horizon. As opposed to those who were not able to answer yes to those questions, because those individuals, the way I read it, had a deep sense of regret. And of course, at that point, they're sort of resisting the fact that the end is coming sooner than they would like, because you can't go back and do it again at that
Mhm.
point. Which is why, I think these are questions to bring into the present tense. It's not about being morbid. Um, and yet, a lot of, mystics and other people talk about the value of thinking about your own death, to your point about the epitaph
Mhm.
exercise, right? It's
Yeah.
not morbid. It's like, how do you want to put your life into context while you have time to do something about it? And if you're not living authentically, if you are not cultivating the types of relationships that you really would like to have, and if you are not having the type of impact that you would like to have, well, now's the time to begin to make those changes. And as I was going through my own journey through all of this stuff, one thing that resonated or became clear to me was that I was not really doing any of those three things particularly well. And while I was a good attorney, it wasn't my authentic self. It wasn't who I was really here to be. Um, and I think that was the one that I was wrestling with the most. And I
Yeah.
suppose it was the impact one as well. I didn't feel as if I was having the type of impact on the lives of other people. Yes, I was helping to make a business deal go through. And so, yes, I was helping a company go from being privately held to being publicly traded, all those. I mean, and there was a short, strong rush of satisfaction from each of those, but nothing that really made me feel like I was doing what I was here to do.
Yeah, very, very similar. I can remember needing to do something else, you
Mm,
know, I guess today it would be called a side hustle, just to fulfill some of that desire to make a bigger impact, to help people in a different way.
mm,
And, some of that was done through the church, some of it was done through charity work, some of it was done starting a side hustle, and I think I
mhm.
went through 20 different side hustles, during that time trying to, like, what is the thing? Am I gonna sell supplements? Am I gonna sell skincare? Am I gonna sell essential oils? Like, is that gonna be the thing? And
Yeah.
it was never the thing. I could never find the thing until you do the journey of the self-reflection, of the, thinking about where you wanna be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 50 years from now. And I think what your questions bring to light, at least for me, is that introspection, that
Mm.
deeply knowing yourself so that all of those things come together.
Yeah, absolutely true. And the another thing that I became aware of as this journey was unfolding about myself, what I learned
Hmm.
about myself. And I suppose, I'm still learning all this stuff, right? So I don't want to I don't want to give everybody the
Yeah, there
impression.
is no there, right?
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
always
it's not like it's not as if I am completely zen every moment of my life now that I've sort of articulated these three questions. Um, but anyway, one of the things that I realized about myself on this journey was that I was looking for life to provide me with meaning, right? Like somehow there was going to be some magical aha moment. For me, it had to do with finding the right career. Okay, kind of your point about your different side hustles, and
yeah.
that somehow those things, whatever it is I was doing for a living, was going to provide me with a profound sense of fulfillment and meaning in my life. And then I came across, or sort of came across again, a quote from Viktor Frankl, right, the famous author of Man's Search for Meaning, Auschwitz survivor. And as he was finishing the manuscript for Man's Search for Meaning, and this is only maybe 18 months or so after he had been liberated from the death camp,
Mhm.
he gave a series of lectures in Vienna. And I came across one of the quotes that he had from those lectures. And the quote goes something like this: it is not we who are permitted to give meaning to life, it is life that asks the questions. And it is up to us to answer the essential life questions. And I was like, wow, yeah, I've been looking at this the wrong way. I've been
Mhm.
looking at this from the wrong perspective. And so that quote, that shift in perspective, is also what helped me formulate these three questions. And
Mhm.
by the way, I don't purport to claim that uh, the three life questions as I articulate them um, are the only important questions that life asks of us. However, given my read of On Death and Dying, and what the dying sort of taught me in that book, I do believe that the three life questions, or at least some of the essential questions that Frankl was referring to, that life is asking us all the time, and really it's up to us to answer them. And I feel that if people pay attention to these three questions, on a regular basis, hopefully daily, that it really becomes sort of an odds thing. That when you get to the end of your life, if you've focused on these three areas every day, I think the odds are pretty good that you're going to be able to answer yes, that you did these things. And therefore, you will feel like your life was a life well lived. And you're absolutely right, Suzanne. It's not about getting the things and stuff, though there is absolutely nothing wrong with getting things and stuff. I totally support it. Like to have a little bit more of it myself, I suppose. But
yeah, I mean, I have my eyes on a Porsche, then there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. But those are not the things that are going to give you that sense that you are living well.
Right.
It's these other things, I think, that are going to matter the most. So anyway, that was kind of how some of these other, my shift in perspective. And when I saw the Frankl quote, I was like, oh, yeah, okay. I've been asking life to give me meaning, and that's not what life does.
Yeah, and I want to pull out something from what you said that is intriguing to me. You're so humble with your questions. They're important questions to consider. And I think this idea of yours of being aware of the questions that life is asking you as an individual, not only your questions, but whatever questions are coming up in your life, and being willing to answer those questions authentically and honestly with yourself is really where, lessons are learned. And I immediately thought of a question of mine that was and it's actually coming to fruition today. And this question was asked of me when my mom was passing in 2004. She had a living will, and I kind of knew what a living will was, but it posed a question to me of what would my living will be? What would I want in that moment? And I didn't think about it at the time because obviously it was a difficult time in my life. But asking that question, and now as I'm older and wiser, and I don't have a living will right now. I'm actually meeting with an attorney later today to actually put that in place, all of my wishes, all of my desires. And I think the power in thinking about all of those things actually makes life more meaningful on a moment by moment basis. My mom passed away very young and didn't have a lot of those thoughts in place. We hadn't had those conversations. And I see the difference since she passed. The relationship I had with my father after she passed was so much different because we were willing to have those conversations because of what we went through with my mom. And, wanting that to be like similar for my son in the future. And I think, yeah, I think being open to the questions life is asking of you is something that you help your clients with, just from my perception of you and the conversations that you have with people.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I don't have the answers to
Right.
those questions, and the answers arrive sort of through you and based on what's important to you. And that's true for every client that I talk to. There's no prescriptive way
Right.
to navigate people through this. There's just an area of areas, of exploration. And, I do a lot of executive coaching. So highly successful, business people.
Mhm.
And uh, I'll give you one example of how I connect the dots between, these three questions and an executive running a company. And the executives that I deal with are typically, um, these are private sector uh, companies where I'm dealing with the owner of the enterprise, right? The CEO, founder. And I want to give attribution for this next piece of how I make these connections happen to a friend and colleague of mine who sadly passed away at the end of December. His name was Lanny Goodman, and I had met Lanny because he was featured in Inc. magazine in 1998, shortly a few years after I'd moved to Albuquerque. And when I saw that I was very intrigued with what he said in this Inc. article. And when I found out that he was based here in Albuquerque, I have to admit I sort of stalked him and until he agreed to meet with me, and then
Well, I've been known to do a little bit of that in my life too.
but I really the framework he laid out, and he and I became really good friends for many years. Anyway, so he has, these are questions again, but he has a framework that he used with his clients, and it was around what he called these 4 entrepreneurial questions. And those 4 questions are: the first one is, what do I, the business owner or entrepreneur, need and want in life? Second question, how can my business help me achieve that? Third question, what would such a business need to look like? And the fourth question, how do we get it to look like that? And I was just like, wow, the simplicity and elegance of that. It was like, sort of what I call a boffo, a blinding flash of the obvious. From Lanny's perspective, the business needs to serve the founder, the entrepreneur. It needs to feed the soul, if you will, of the entrepreneur. And so the connection then between Lanny's 4 entrepreneur questions and my 3 life questions is really wrapped up in Lanny's first question: what do I need and want in life? Now, that question, from Lanny's standpoint, he was rather agnostic about what the answers were for the business owner. I mean, they could be, more money, more free time, whatever it was. But as he and I developed a stronger connection with one another, what he came to appreciate about my 3 questions is that to answer his first question, what do I need? That needs to at least include a discussion with the entrepreneur about the 3 life questions, right? Because if the business can be designed in a way that it helps the entrepreneur answer the 3 life questions, what a blessing! Like, what a blessing to the entrepreneur. Because now all of that time, energy, effort, and money that the entrepreneur and his or her life partner have poured into this enterprise, it is now being designed to serve something that is far beyond just getting the things and stuff that make life enjoyable. And so there's how I now, in my coaching work with an entrepreneur, will sort of, work those 2 things together. And there aren't any simple answers.
Yeah.
When you give an entrepreneur a framework like that, within which they can begin to answer those things for themselves, the answers begin to manifest themselves far more clearly than in the absence of thinking it through in those terms.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this whole journey of entrepreneurship entrepreneurship is actually for this purpose. And I'm not married to another entrepreneur, and he often didn't understand why I did certain things.
Mm.
And I remember a conversation, and you're going to resonate with this conversation, about why I would be having all of these conversations and networking and meeting people if I wasn't charging the person I was talking to.
Mm.
And, coming from the healthcare space, every person that was in my chair was paying, ultimately for
Right.
being there.
Mhm.
And entrepreneurship, when you have a business, whether you sell product or service or coaching or consulting, so much of it is relationship
Mm.
based. And I had a realization in that moment that what my husband does for a living is not relationship based, it's transactional. And so
So,
understanding a relationship based business, I had to explain that to him. And once
mm.
he got it, he totally got it. And I realized the connection between what I used to do for a living, the things I loved about being a dental hygienist, were the things I could bring forward into entrepreneurship.
Mm.
And it was only through that self-discovery that I figured out that I like the relationship part of being a dental hygienist. I like the conversations that I was having. I like the sharing of information. So how can I make those things part of my entrepreneur journey? And I think that connection
Mm.
between what you used to do and how you bring the things you loved about what you used to do forward
Mhm.
are key.
Mhm. Yeah, yes, I that resonates with me for sure. I do,
Mm,
you and I are both very familiar with the YOS. You referred to it in the opening, and I'm, a coach with the Y Institute. It's one of the tools in my toolkit, I suppose,
mhm.
that I have found to be really useful
Yeah.
for helping people understand themselves a little bit differently than perhaps they
Mhm.
might go into it. And so, um, my particular why, how, and what, and this for those of your listeners who aren't familiar, it really arose out of Simon Sinek's work, um, his famous TED talk on the golden circle, which is about identifying um, not just what you do or how what you do is different. It's also why do you do it in the first
Yeah.
place. And then he wrote a great book called Start with Why. In any event, my personal why, how, and what is my why is to create clarity. I really enjoy making things clear, and how I do that is by helping people solve complex problems, such as navigating the three life questions and figuring out how to integrate those within the framework of Lanny's, four entrepreneur questions. How do you design a
Yeah.
business? Hope you do that. And then finally, what I bring to the table, what my clients can count on me for, is called mastery. But what it really refers to is that I am very comfortable um, going deep on things with people. You're not going to get a cookie cutter sort of formulaic answer from me.
Right.
Um, but to your point, where part of where I learned this notion of making sense and helping people figure complex things out certainly was prevalent in the legal work I did, in the transactional work I did, because you were trying, particularly with large companies doing big transactional deals. It was very much like a jigsaw puzzle.
Mhm.
You're trying to fit all the pieces together in a
Oh, yeah.
way that both sides, so you had to come up with creative solutions. You had to think things through. You had to think through the implications of various terms and conditions that you were putting into the deal. um, so yeah, that's all very much a part of how I like to operate. And it's one of the things that I enjoy helping people understand about themselves, because when they are able to understand their own why, how, and what, they begin to see themselves in a new light. And
Yeah.
when you discover your why, how, and what, it is nothing that you don't already know. It's not as if
Yeah.
doing this discovery tells you something different
Mm-hmm.
or new. What it does is it gives language to where do you feel successful. And I feel successful when I can make things clear, when I can help people solve complex problems, and where I can do that by going in depth. I just, that's not work for me. That's what I enjoy doing.
Yeah.
um, anyway, sorry, I might have gotten a little off track with that.
No, it was so good because that work for me literally changed how I connected with other people.
Mm.
Um, Challenging the status quo is my why. And yeah, did I always know that? Yes, absolutely. That little rebel inside of me, right? Don't
Mm-hmm.
tell me not to do something, I'll do it twice. And I think knowing that that's how I served other people, helping, you know, by
Totally.
challenging the status quo is so impactful for me.
Right. And you bring that think differently.
Mhm.
What makes you, in my experience of you, one of the many things that makes you an exceptional coach is not only your willingness to challenge people and perhaps call BS on someone,
Mhm.
uh, which is useful for a coach, but you also have a great gift for inviting people to see things through a different lens. And in doing that, it opens up for the individual that you're coaching answers that they wouldn't have seen
Right.
in the absence of that kind of challenging thing. So yeah.
But I think, knowing that about myself is how you can have, the answer to your second question. You can have more impact when you know those things about yourself.
Sure.
And knowing that I'm a simplifier, that's how I help people challenge the status quo. Knowing that was kind of like this aha moment
Mhm.
of impact for me.
Mhm.
So by helping me see the why, what, and how of what I do, you actually helped me answer number 2 of your 3 life
Mhm.
questions. So for me, seeing that connection
Mhm.
with what you do as a coach helped me help you, which is like, oh my gosh, right?
That's the Jerry Maguire thing, right?
Yeah. Help me help you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it also, another reason why I utilize that particular instrument. And there are other great instruments out there: DISC, Myers-Briggs, predictive index, you name it.
Yeah.
All of those instruments, in my view, help us understand what we can expect behaviorally from Suzanne or from Chris.
Mhm.
The why discovery instrument, which, as you know, takes less than 10 minutes to complete and is incredibly accurate, what it does is it really helps explain why is Suzanne going to be motivated to behave in this way. And when
Mhm.
you have both of those together, they complement one another. One isn't better than the other. But
Right.
when you have both of those in place, you really have a deep understanding of yourself. And for me, that goes a long way toward helping someone rediscover and express their own authenticity, which is the first question. Am I living authentically? Well, for many of us, we are taught, I certainly was, um, that who you are uh, can be defined by what you do.
Yeah.
Who you are is a function of your level of achievement and success in the working world, or whether you have 2.5 kids and white fence and a golden retriever, kind of thing, which is baked into our culture and has nothing to do, in my view, with who you really are. Who
Yeah.
you really are is none of those things. And does the Y instrument, together with DISC, Myers-Briggs, do those things define who Suzanne really is? No, 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 no. What they do is they offer very useful clues,
Yeah.
right? Only you, Suzanne, will know whether you are living authentically. There is no instrument out there that will provide that answer and that clarity to you. But these instruments, some of these instruments, when you sort of talk through them, and then as you know, the emotional intelligence stuff that what is your judge, your internal judge, and your saboteurs, those internal voices that no one wants to really admit to the outside world, but they're going on. What are the negative voices saying to you, Suzanne, about how you're acting or what you're doing, or
Yeah.
should I move forward or not? All of those things offer great clues and great insights into helping you define, your authentic self, so that you can take the next step forward in your own journey with integrity. Martha Beck wrote a great book called The Way of Integrity. And what's brilliant about the book is that she uses the Divine Comedy.
Mm.
Dante's
Yeah.
travels through hell and purgatory and paradise as the framework for this book. And it's just really well written, and there's a lot of great value in it. But this notion of living in integrity, being your authentic self, I can't stress how important that is, because frankly, I feel that when you are able to walk in integrity in terms of your authentic self, the other two questions almost, not entirely, but they almost answer themselves. Because when you're your authentic self, you can have more meaningful relationships with other people, because now authentic self, hopefully to authentic self, I mean, that's an entirely different type of relationship. We all know
Yeah.
relationships in our lives that are completely superficial. Completely superficial, because this person's being superficial, they're acting the way they think they're supposed to act, and this person's being superficial. And we also all know genuine, deep, and they're far fewer,
Mm-hmm.
the real authentic relationships where I accept you for who you are, and you accept me for who I am. And that's sort of a true self to true self kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, when you do that, when both people are acting authentically and they make a connection, there's a meaningful relationship that you can cultivate, right? And
Yeah.
when you have those types of things going on, you almost can't help but have a positive impact on other people in your world. And so I think this authenticity thing it's the first question, because I think it's the first question.
Yeah, and I think it's so much deeper than, authenticity is a little bit of a buzzword
Mm,
today,
mm,
just on social media, right? And I think it's so much deeper than the buzzword.
yeah.
And I had a conversation this morning with one of my clients, and I started off the conversation, because I know myself so well, with a disclaimer. I said, "I would like to have a difficult conversation with you, and I know I'm gonna be speaking truth. Truth for me might not be truth for
For
you,
you. And
and I might sound a little bitchy, and I might sound a little angry, but I'm not." And, my client was very surprised by
mm,
this disclaimer at the beginning of the conversation, but because I know myself so well, I know I don't sugarcoat, I know I don't coddle, I know I don't do fluff, and it's going to come out what I have to say, and it might be perceived by you as being a little angry or bitchy or whatever, but I'm telling you it's coming from a place of love
Mm,
and calling you to be better, do better, all the
mm,
things. And that only is because I know myself so well. And I've had experiences where I've gotten feedback like, oh, well, why are you so angry at me? Oh, I'm not. So I think the exploration that you're doing with your clients is really what is required
mm.
today to be a CEO, to be an entrepreneur, to be a founder, to be a leader of anyone else. You have to be willing to do this work that we're talking about today.
I agree. I agree. I mean, I do think Simon Sinek was right in his book Start With Why, where the premise of the entire, to distill it down, it's the people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And
Yeah.
when you use the word buy, people don't buy what you do. That's true of leaders and followers, right? People buy into you, not so much based on what you do, even how you do it. They can sense why you're doing it. And
Mhm.
when you are inauthentic, um, most people will sniff that, maybe not right away, but certainly eventually, because your behaviors will belie, what you're really all about in the
Yeah.
end. So why not be authentic up front and pull towards you individuals who believe in what you believe. And
Good.
um, I think there's a lot of power behind that. And yes, you're absolutely right. Authenticity is now sort of overused, I suppose, and there's a lot of inauthenticity in describing and discussing authenticity, I think. Um,
Yeah.
but as I said before, you know it when you're being authentic, and you also know when you are being inauthentic. And so my call to action for individuals is to live authentically, however you define that for yourself. That's not up for me or anybody else to define. But the more you do it, the more you will attract people with whom you can cultivate meaningful relationships. And once you have that, the impact that you and the people around you can have is sort of exponential.
Yeah. Perfect place to wrap up. And I want to just offer a conversation with you if anyone's interested in going deeper on these questions. Or, you've been such an incredible guide here today in thinking about life's questions. And if that's what, any of our listeners are looking for,
Mhm.
please ask for an intro to Chris. And where can they find you, Chris?
Yeah, so my website is probably a great place to start. It's simply the3lifequestions.com, and the number three is the numerical. So it's the word the, then the number three, lifequestionsplural.com. Thank you. And
Love.
then there's a contact me form there. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I would welcome connections, opportunities to talk with people about this. Again, I don't purport to have answers for you. I suppose, like any good coach, my job is more about asking questions than providing answers. But I do hope that the questions and the way I frame them and present them to people will be useful for individuals discovering their own answers, because that's really what it's all about in the end. Um, People discovering their own answers, their own way to live authentically, their own way for cultivating meaningful relationships, and their own method of having and defining what it is to have a positive impact in the world. Um, but I can tell you this for sure: that those are 3 questions that you need to answer, and you need to answer them daily. Because if you do, you will be able to have a great sense of peace. And if you don't, if you wait until the end, I think you run too great a risk of feeling a deep sense of regret. And I don't want that for anyone.
Yeah. I forget who said it, but the version of hell on earth is being on your deathbed and meeting or being aware of the person you are capable of being.
Yeah. Yeah. And similarly, I don't know if he said this or if he pulled it from someone else, but as you know, I am a huge fan of Richard Rohr, who's written dozens of books on spirituality. Anyway, I remember one quote from him is that it's hell all the way to hell, and it's heaven all the way to heaven. And I think that if you pay attention to these 3 questions on a daily basis, you run a much greater you have much greater opportunity for it to feel more like heaven all the way to heaven. And that's what look, it's what I'm looking for myself, which is why I feel that this is so important. And if I can help other people navigate through these 3 questions, or navigate through Lanny's 4 entrepreneur questions, or both of them together, I will feel very much like I am living into my authenticity, that I will be cultivating meaningful relationships, and that I will be making the world a little bit better. So I don't know, maybe this is all very self-serving. I don't know. That's a bit above my pay grade. I guess I'm still working on that. But
Yeah.
I do hope that this has been useful to your podcast listeners. And yes, absolutely, I would welcome the opportunity to speak with anyone who's interested in exploring this further.
I love it. Thanks so much for joining today, Chris. I appreciate you and all the questions that you inspire within me. And thank you, everyone who tuned in today. Give Chris a follow on LinkedIn. And thanks again for being here on Unlock Your Way with STK.